So inshallah, today's topic is based on a verse in the Quran. This verse is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where He instructs the believers to hold firm onto the rope of Allah. It says, واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا. To hold firm to the rope of Allah all together, meaning every single individual. And then it says, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and do not divide amongst each other. Now, what does we understand to hold firm? But what does Hablullah, the rope of Allah, mean? What does it represent? There are many other narrations that explain it to us. Perhaps the most correct narration is the one that shows us that the rope of Allah is the Quran itself. And this call to unity is something that we find throughout the Quran itself and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ as well. We've touched in the khutbah a little bit about unity. Unity is important for many different reasons, and the scholars mention the different reasons, but perhaps the most well-known reason is with unity comes strength, right? One of the reasons why we are encouraged to pray in Jama'a in the masjid, to come together and pray together. Yes, there is virtue. It is more virtuous for a person to pray with other people than to pray alone. But it also serves many other purposes. That once a person is together with others in big numbers, they will not be forgotten. Imagine if a person lives in a small village, in a small town somewhere, and they come to their masjid, to their mosque, and they frequent the mosque. Then if that person is absent, sickness or travel or whatever it might be, people will notice. And this is one of the many benefits of unity coming together. And when Allah speaks of unity in the Quran, it is spoken of as a mercy. Allah said, وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ, that mankind will not cease to have disagreements and different point of views, except the ones that your Lord Allah has mercy upon. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not entitled to your own opinion and that people can't have difference in opinion, but it is that unity that is referred to as mercy. Right? And for any society to function in a proper way, there is a need for that unity. And in this same verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reminds those companions that were with the Prophet, peace be upon him, about this great blessing of unity. Allah says, وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ, and remember the blessing that Allah bestowed upon you. What is this blessing? Allah says, إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ, that before you used to be enemies, and not just any type of enemy. This was back in the day in Medina, before the Prophet ﷺ arrived. There used to be two main tribes that lived in Medina, that was known as Yathrib back in those days. These two tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj, they were in constant conflict. They would fight, and they fought huge wars and battles. killing men, women and children. Right? They were fierce enemies. And the thing that brought them together was when the Prophet ﷺ arrived in Medina, he brought them together with the help of Allah. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا. And Allah, out of His mercy, He made, and this specific word that is used here, the word used is ta'leef, meaning to intertwine and make one your hearts. Right? When you have two different individuals, right? We see this in marriage, right? Two completely different individuals. They come together, and through that marriage, they actually become almost like one person, right? That love that binds them together, those values, that same outlook in life, all that makes them almost like one individual. And when you have two individuals who hate each other, right? They can't stand one another, open enemies. Their hearts could be, and sometimes in certain narrations it mentions this, that one person's heart is in the east and the other person's is in the west, just to a figure of speech to show us how distant these two people are. Right? But yet, when Allah speaks of these people who used to be enemies, now their hearts have become intertwined and they've become like one heart, one person. فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا. And through the mercy or that blessing of Allah, you became brothers. And this is one of the amazing things, one of the many miracles that the Prophet ﷺ performed in his life. That he came to a city, right, like Yathrib, that eventually became Medina, that was so destroyed by this warfare that had been going on for many years. So much so that these tribes, they were even reluctant to marry from each other, and they would only marry from their own tribe. And it was almost like the flick of a switch. Right? Once the Prophet ﷺ came and he taught them what Islam stood for as a religion, as a way of life, these individuals who couldn't stand each other, if they had any opportunity, they would have killed each other on sight. All of a sudden, they became brothers. Right? And not only that, but it brought back that life to the city that the city hadn't seen for a very long time. So this is the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds the believers that it has happened in the past. And sometimes we fall into this trap that we read the Quran or we read a hadith from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and we think to ourselves, this happened a long time ago. These people that you speak of, they were much more pious than us. They were much greater men. They were much greater women. And how on earth can we be like these people? Right? The world is not the same place anymore. Right? Before, people would worry about matters of piety, matters of righteousness. Whereas today, even if you tried the best that you can, you wouldn't be able to escape many of the trials and tribulations that you face in daily life. You would basically have to become a caveman, in order to stay away from this fitna, these tests. But one of the beautiful things in Islam is that we are not meant to be perfect. Right? This is a concept that sometimes is alien to some, even Muslims, is that we strive for perfection. We strive for perfection. Doesn't mean that just because you can't become perfect that you do not strive for it. But we understand that as humans we have limitations. The Prophet ﷺ, even though he received so many blessings time and time again, he had his past sins forgiven and he had his future sins forgiven. Imagine. It's amazing to have some people, they live their whole lives hoping that their past sins will be forgiven. Imagine a person that has their future sins forgiven. If any one of us had that sort of blessing, we would have stopped doing everything we do, right? Stopped praying, stopped giving charity, stopped being kind, stopped being a decent human being. But that is not the essence. That is not the true teachings of Islam. And that is what the Prophet ﷺ understood. So when other people saw him praying even more and doing even more than other people who didn't have the security of having their past sins forgiven or their future sins, people would ask him, they would say, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, your past sins are forgiven and your future sins are forgiven. So why pray tahajjud at night? Why pray qiyamul layl at night? And the Prophet ﷺ gave that well-known response. He said, should I not be a grateful slave, servant of Allah? So coming back to that great blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed these people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that by coming together for the sake of Allah and holding fast to the book of Allah, the Quran, that teaches us those valuable guidelines in life, those rules that we share, it brought about an amazing change. It made that city, Medina, from a small village made up of 2 tribes that were fighting into the capital of the whole Muslim world. Right? And there's an important point to mention here, is that sometimes when we look into the past, we look into the past with putting on glasses of nostalgia, right? We make the past look better than it truly was, right? Even our short, small lives, without looking into history, if you look into your childhood and you try to remember your childhood, chances are that what you remember of your childhood are those amazing moments, right? The laughter, the stress-free life that you had, the happiness, being with your mother, being with your father, being around people that you love. But you won't necessarily remember those difficult moments. Those moments that you cried, those moments that you felt lonely. The point I'm trying to make here is, yes, when we talk about generations and we speak of who was best and closest to perfection, that without a doubt was the generation of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions that lived with him. the best of generations, because they had the Prophet ﷺ there, alive with them. But does not mean that they lived in a utopia. No. They had problems. They had hypocrites, people who worked against them. They had people who, carried themselves in a bad way. They had enemies, they had worries. So again, when we look into the past, we do not look into it striving for, a utopia that we can never reach, but we understand the truthfulness of the statement of Allah, that if we truly hold fast to the Quran and the Sunnah, we are not going to get a Jannah, a paradise in this world. This world is not meant to be a paradise. There's always going to be problems. You're always going to bump heads with people. There's always going to be someone that speaks ill of you, backbites you, speaks ill of you. But if, as a Muslim, you strive, every day you do things for the sake of Allah, and every day you try your best to become better and better, that is the whole aim, that is the whole purpose. Some of the companions, they would sometimes complain to the Prophet ﷺ, and they would say, there's so much to do, so many obligations, so many parts of the faith, there's zakat, there's fasting, there's this, there's that, there's so many elements and aspects of the whole religion. And the Prophet ﷺ told his companions, he said, "Saddidu wa qaribu," meaning, and I'm paraphrasing here, it means try your best. No one can reach or attain Jannah, paradise, through their deeds. There's no one that can come and say, oh Allah, I worshipped you for 50 years. And I'm going to change my 50 years of worship for paradise. No, it doesn't work that way. But the point of it is to try your best. Try to come as close as possible. Right? And if you have that mentality, if you have that outlook in life, you will see a lot of things changing. Right? Little by little, step by step. An important point to mention as well is when it comes to unity, you will notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often speaks about disunity. There's always the opposite that is mentioned. And this has a great effect, not just when you speak about unity, but when you speak about anything. When there is death mentioned in the Quran, there is life that is mentioned. When there is evil mentioned, there is good that is mentioned. And when, paradise is mentioned, there is hell that is mentioned. So there's a lot of things that are mentioned in opposites. And the same goes for unity. So the reason why the opposite is mentioned is it is to encourage us to run towards unity and stay away from disunity. So one of the things that Allah often mentions in the Quran, and just reading the following verses to the ones that I just mentioned, Allah says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا وَاخْتَلَفُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْبَيِّنَاتِ. Meaning, and do not become like those people before you who went separate ways and disagreed after they received clear guidance. And if you look into the history, you will see this time and time again, whether it is you look into what happened before the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ, or even after the Prophet ﷺ came, and when he passed away, what happened? Right? Many of you might not know much about Islamic history, but there was a big rift that happened when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. Such a big, huge rift that it led to some of the companions taking up arms against each other. And again, it shows the dangers of this disunity. It brings about ultimately death. It leads to people transgressing against others. And that example that I gave in the khutbah earlier today, it is very true, and it's something that is mentioned by many scholars, that they say that, this whole life, all the people that you encounter, it is similar to the boat of Noor, right? Prophet Noor alayhi salam, he had that boat, the ark, and it was a safe haven, right? It saved people from drowning, according to the Quran and the other books that were revealed before. Now, if you are on a boat, you better make sure that everyone on the boat works together. There's a beautiful story, and I think I've mentioned it before, about why it is important to enjoin good and forbid what is evil. Sometimes, especially in our society today, people, they say, it doesn't matter, you do what you want to do, and that person does what they want to do, and as long as it doesn't affect me, what that person is doing, then why should I worry about someone else's mistakes or actions? And the example is this boat again. Imagine, and you kids at the back, follow me. Imagine you're on a boat, right? This boat is a big boat, and it has different levels, different decks. Now, the people on the top deck, they are pretty well off, right? And they have access to rainwater. If you're at sea, I hope all of you know that you shouldn't be drinking seawater, right? Because it's salt water, and if you drink it, it only makes you more thirsty and could kill you, right? Now, the people on the top, they have the rainwater that they can drink, right? And the people on the bottom, they don't have access to that. So every time they need to drink water, they have to put in a request to the people on top. And they have to say, we need some water, please give us some water. After a while, they get tired. So every single time we want water, we have to ask, and underneath us, there's plenty of water. Let us just make a hole right here, and we don't have to ask the people on the top. Now, what happens if the people on the bottom make a hole in the ship, in the boat, instead of asking? That hole will make the boat sink, and when the boat sinks, it sinks not only them, but even the people on the top. So now, the people on the top, they have a vested interest in making sure that the people on the bottom don't drill the hole. Because if they drill the hole, then all of them will perish. And this is the example that is often missing from our society today, that when you see someone, let's say, just for argument's sake, you see a child, right? And this child behaves in a bad way. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they do things that are not good. Now, if you go with the mindset that, you know what, this is not my child is good, my child is right here beside me, and you just leave it, what happens? If you don't help that child, don't correct that child will go and influence other children. So instead of helping, you think of yourself, and that one problem becomes two, becomes three, and so on. So this is why it is important. Coming back to the point, now when you look into the past and you see the mistakes that people made before, there is a common thread of, it's more like a set of patterns, right, that you see happening time and time again. And the essence of that is, often it is lack of knowledge. Right? People, they act without knowledge. I'll give you an example. There used to be a great scholar before. His name was Al-Hasan al-Basri. He was a great imam. And he focused on teaching people the basics, what it meant to be a Muslim, both in terms of theory, the beliefs and the basics of the religion, and also in action. He was a very generous man, he was a very righteous man. Now, he used to have a group of people that would come and sit, and he would give classes. For a very long time, there used to be a student of his by the name of Wasil bin Ata. This student would come, sit, be quiet, and listen attentively to the teacher. One day, he disagreed with the teacher on an issue. And because of that, he stopped coming to the classes that this great imam used to give. But it didn't end there. He not only disagreed, once he separated himself from the imam and the group of students, he started his own circle. And this is well documented in history. And he started spreading these misconceptions. And again, it didn't stop only there, it went beyond. The teacher that he regarded to be an imam, a person with great knowledge, he started backbiting his own teacher. And he started to speak bad and ill of his teacher. And he used to say that the imam, the only thing he talks about is he talks about purification. He talks about these kind of matters. Whereas what we need is more advanced issues. We need an imam that speaks about more detail of society today. We do not need someone that only reads from books. And little by little, this man went more and more astray, and finally, he completely cut off ties with the imam. And do you see this pattern? That how dangerous it is that people who do not have knowledge, people who separate themselves from the Jama'a, from the group of Muslims, The Prophet ﷺ, he said in more than one hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is supporting the Jama'a, the majority, the group of Muslims. Right? In the same way that if you have a flock of sheep, right? If you have a flock of sheep, if the sheep stay together, if a wolf or an animal comes and attacks that flock, there is safety in numbers, right? But what does the wolf go for? The wolf doesn't go for the flock. The wolf, and it's an intelligent animal, it looks for the animal that goes astray, the animal that is by itself. And again, linking it back to the point that I was making in the beginning, this is one of the reasons why the ummah and the jama'ah, that sense of belonging, is very important to a Muslim. And I'm sure you can attest to it yourselves. When you frequent the masjid, when you come to the masjid often, more than just on Jum'ah, if you come and you participate, then you feel your iman increasing, right? But if you haven't been to the masjid for a week, 2 weeks, and you're by yourself, you feel a change, right? Even if it's just a slight change. This is why, let's say in Ramadan, you feel that increase in your iman, in your faith. Yes, it's a blessed time, it's a good time, but you come more to the masjid, you engage with people in the masjid, and that increases your iman and it has positive results. So this jama'ah, the concept of being together, it is an essential part of Islam. When the scholars speak of the Muslims, we speak of the ummah, right? The whole nation. And we are discouraged as individuals to go against the majority. Not to say that the majority is always correct, that the majority is always safe. Yes, there are always exceptions. There's always been exceptions to rules. But as a general statement, and this is something that we as Muslims, we need to emphasize even more when we live in a place, like this. Canada, it's a very beautiful country. It has so much virtue, so much good, right? And we are grateful to Allah first and foremost to be able to live in a place like this. And at the same time, as Muslims, it is important for us to be part of society, to be integrated into society, and as well to make sure that we stay true to our foundations, to stay true to our beliefs. This is why in the khutbah when I mentioned today that when it comes to unity itself, it is important to know what you are uniting upon. Right? You hear it time and time again. When you just say unity, yes, it has positive connotations, it has positive things that comes with it. But just like a knife can be good or bad, unity can be good or bad. If you unite upon good, then that unity is good. But if you unite upon evil, then that unity is of no value. So the point I'm trying to make here is that when we look at the bigger picture, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to remain one. When the Prophet ﷺ gave that famous khutbah one of the last sermons that he gave, he reminded people that your Lord is one, your religion is one, your father, meaning Adam alayhi salam, is one, and you are one nation, one group of people. This sense of belonging, this sense of unity, it is sacred. It is sacred in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages it. There's a hadith mentioned in Sahih Muslim. It says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna Allah yarda lakum thalatha." That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased for you three things. That Allah Azza wa Jal wants for you three things. وَيَسْخُطْ لَكُمْ ثَلَاثًا. And Allah Azza wa Jal is displeased for you three things. يَرْضَى لَكُمْ أَن تَعْبُدُوهُ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. So the first thing that Allah Azza wa Jal is pleased with, and that He encourages, and that He wants for you, is that you worship Him alone, and that you do not associate any partners with Him. And this is something that you find throughout the Abrahamic religions. If you go back to the 10 Commandments that Musa alayhi salam received, the first point, it is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and not associate partners with Him. And then the second point is وَأَن تَعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. It is to unite and hold firm upon the rope of Allah, meaning the Quran, all of you together, and do not go separate ways. The same point that the ayah, that verse mentioned, that we mentioned earlier. And finally, the thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with and encourages you is وَأَن تَنَاصَحُوا, that you give nasiha to each other. Okay? Both those in power and to your fellow brother and sister. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes and is displeased for you three things. That Allah Azza wa Jalla does not want these three things for you. So what are these three things? The first one is qeel wa qaal, meaning hearsay, right? When you say, I heard this, and you spread that kind of speech. This person said, and she said, and he said, and so on. This is something that Allah Azza wa Jal does not want for you, because it does not bring anything good. The only thing it brings is you becoming someone that passes on rumors, hurting people's feelings, creating lies about people, and this is something that Allah Azza wa Jal is displeased with. The second point is وَكَثْرَةُ السُّؤَالِ, and asking excessive amount of questions, too many questions. And again, this is a point where people sometimes they misunderstand. They say, does it mean that in Islam we're not encouraged to ask questions? And the answer is simple. In Islam we're very much encouraged to ask questions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself tells us in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those people with knowledge if you do not know the answer. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ encourages us to seek knowledge, to study the religion and to study knowledge. But what is meant here is asking questions for the sake of asking questions. Arguing for the sake of arguing. Right? This doesn't bring any benefit. It wastes a person's time. So again, it is not about asking questions itself, even if the question might be regarded as the most silliest of questions. Right? As long as the person asks with the right intention, then it does not mean that Allah dislikes it, but it is that excessiveness of asking questions for the sake of asking questions. And the final point is وَإِضَاعَةُ الْمَالِ, and that means being wasteful with money. Allah does not love someone that is wasteful with money. Rather, what Allah loves is that you make use of the wealth and the blessings that Allah gave you. And now sometimes people, again, they misunderstand this and they say, well, if I want to buy a nice jacket, if I want to buy nice shoes, if I want to buy a nice car, is that being wasteful with money? And the answer that most scholars give is that no. As a Muslim, there is nothing that stops a person from living a decent life. But what extravagant or wasteful in money means is using it in an excessive amount where something less than it would have been sufficient. But to buy the watch that you've been wanting to buy, or to buy the shoes that you wanted to buy, that you've saved up for, that you've worked hard for, that in Islam is not a problem. So inshallah, we're coming close towards the end of today's topic. I just want to reiterate some of the points that we made, that in Islam we are encouraged to unite, and that unity is upon the book of Allah, meaning the Quran, and upon the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those traditions that have been passed down to us by generation after generation, that can authentically be traced back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we understand all of that in the context, in the light of the interpretation of those companions that were around the Prophet ﷺ. And that point itself is very, very important. Because today you have some people, what they do is they open the Quran, right? Or they open any book, a hadith book, and they read a verse from the Quran, the translation, and they say, I think it means this. Or they read a hadith and they say, yes, the Prophet ﷺ is speaking about this. But in reality, there's context, there's a way to understand it. So in Islam, we have a methodology to go about things, and that methodology is very important. So to unite upon the truth as we know it, and to stay away from that disunity. It cripples us as a nation, as a people, when we are divided. Right? When you are united and you have one goal in mind and you want to achieve one thing, then that is a very powerful thing itself. Imagine today if a non-Muslim, right, if they want to connect with the Muslims, right, what do? Who do they reach out to? They reach out to the masjid, right? If someone asks you, where should I go if I want to learn about Islam and Muslims? The answer is simple. You go to the masjid and you encounter the Muslims and you see for yourself with your own eyes, right? But imagine there were 15, 20 different groups that all gave their version. They said, oh, if you want to talk to Muslims, come to us. If you want to talk to Muslims, no, come to us. What will end up happening? People will get confused. Do I go to this place, or do I go to that place, or where do I go? And instead of it being effective and focused and targeted, it becomes scattered and less focused. And we gave the example of the fact that we are all in this together. Okay? That if we succeed with showing people what true Islam means, then we all succeed. We all benefit from it. Right? Our aim, it is not, we are not the ones that make people Muslims, right? Even the Prophet ﷺ, his mission was never to make people Muslim. This is a big mistake. This is a big misunderstanding. His mission was not to make people Muslim, because he couldn't do that. This is something beyond him. And Allah reminds him in the Quran that the only thing that the Prophet ﷺ was commanded with, إِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ, that the only thing that you are that is required from you, it is to convey the message. You can't force people to believe. لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُصَيْطِرٍ. You cannot force people to believe. And this is the same mission that we have here at the masjid. We are not here to make people Muslim and force them inside the masjid and say this is how we pray and this is how we do and this. No. The only thing that we can do is we present Islam the way it is. We tell people this is our way of life. This is what we believe. This is why we believe this. This is why we practice what we do. And if the person says, yes, this makes sense to me, then alhamdulillah. If the person says, you know what, it doesn't make sense to me, I want to live my life the way that I want, we say, to each his own. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. You have your religion and I have my religion. You will be asked for your choices and I will be asked for my choices. So, when it comes to unity, there is unity, there is disunity, and why disunity is dangerous on so many different levels. And the concept in Islam of a jama'a, a collective ummah, and the many benefits that comes with it. And once we divert from the Quran and the Sunnah, once we divert from this community, the sense of oneness, then that is when a lot of problems start appearing. And we do not see the problems that will come ahead. Right? Many people, they say, well, what's the problem? Let these people do what they want and let us do what we want and so on. But history, it tends to repeat itself. Some people, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? And it's almost the same concept, that we see what has happened to other communities, whether it is, in our own lifetime. Many brothers, they might have spent some time in other cities, right? Other parts of the world. Some are from Calgary, some are from other parts of Canada, right? And you've seen what happens. Once the community goes into different directions, it is almost impossible to bring the community back together as one. And again, the scholars in Islam, they are the ones that can see through their knowledge, obviously. They do not have supernatural powers, but based upon their knowledge, they can anticipate things that will happen. In the same way that a person that knows about how clouds move, they can tell you. They can say, well, based upon my knowledge and my research, I can see that it's most likely that it's going to rain tomorrow. Right? Did this person have supernatural powers? No. They studied, they researched, and they said, my conclusion is it might rain. Similarly, a scholar in Islam, he can look at a community and he can see what is happening in a community and he can come to conclusions. This is the most likely outcome. And inshallah, with that, we will conclude the topic for today. We will open up for some questions concerning the topic itself. I hope it was informative and fairly straightforward. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask.